Manny Pacquiao is etched into boxing history as a once-in-a-lifetime phenomenon, a fighter many believe will never be duplicated. He stands alone as the only boxer to capture world championships across each separate weight divisions, from flyweight all the way up to light middleweight. It's a feat that borders on impossible in today's boxing landscape. Over his career, he collected 12 major world titles, securing championships under the WBC, WBA, IBF, and WBO banners. At 40 years old, in a sport that punishes age without mercy, he made history again by becoming the oldest welterweight champion ever for nearly 2 decades. Manny Pacquiao stood at the center of boxing's biggest moments, stepping into the ring with elite opponents and beating a long list of top-tier names. His presence helped create boxing's golden age of pay-per-view. He earned Fighter of the Decade honors, claimed Fighter of the Year awards multiple times, and his legacy was permanently cemented with induction into the International Boxing Hall of Fame, a place reserved only for those who fundamentally changed the sport. After spending decades at the summit, Pacquiao was never just a title holder. He became a worldwide symbol, one of the most influential fighters in boxing history, viewed by American audiences as the embodiment of speed, grit, willpower, and relentless aggression inside the ring. But beneath that near-flawless public legacy existed a very different reality, one where Manny Pacquiao lived between 2 conflicting lives that were never meant to collide. On one side stood the unstoppable warrior, always strong in public view, always bearing the hopes of millions of poor people who saw him as living proof that destiny could be defied. On the other side was a man burdened by constant physical pain, stacked injuries, and countless sleepless nights when his body refused to respond to his commands. He carried a deep fear of falling back into poverty, knowing that if he ever showed weakness, the belief of an entire nation could crack along with him. Manny learned how to suffer quietly. He learned how to smile even as his body cried out for relief. He learned how to keep pushing forward when his mind was completely drained, because he understood that his life no longer belonged only to himself. For 3 decades, he wasn't just battling the men across the ring. He was fighting himself, fighting his own physical and human limitations. The reality was that becoming a symbol of strength required sacrificing the freedom to live like a normal person. That same unbreakable will, forged through pain, forced him to stand between 2 parallel lives that almost no one ever truly saw. If you want to continue following the untold journey behind Manny Pacquiao's spotlight, where strength and suffering walked side by side for 30 years, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next chapter of this story. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you in the next part, where the truth behind the dual lives of a legend slowly begins to surface. Manny Pacquiao wasn't raised to dream, because in the place where he grew up, dreaming was a luxury that could be more dangerous than hunger itself. During Manny's childhood, Mindanao was not a land of innocence or carefree youth. It was a land defined by survival, where poverty existed in every narrow alley, every makeshift home, every meal that wasn't enough, and in the tired, defeated expressions of adults who had grown and accustomed to losing battles against life. In that environment, children weren't encouraged to imagine a brighter future. They were taught how to endure the harsh present. Manny was raised amid constant arguments over money, surrounded by days when his parents had no answers for their poverty, and within an atmosphere where violence wasn't shocking, but simply another result of desperation. When hunger lingers too long, people lose the patience to be kind, and a child like Manny learned early on that the world shows no mercy to weakness. He left school at a very young age, not due to laziness or a lack of ambition, but because textbooks couldn't satisfy hunger. Education was a privilege Manny couldn't afford. While other children could sit quietly in classrooms, he couldn't focus with only one question echoing in his mind: what will we eat today? Manny entered street life early, becoming part of the daily hustle in crowded markets, where the stench of rotten fish, sweat, and garbage blended into an environment adults found unbearable. But for children like Manny, learning to survive meant learning to tolerate what others could not. There were nights when he slept directly on the cold ground, curled up amid the never-ending noise of the streets, using cardboard boxes or old sacks as blankets. He learned to close his eyes quickly, so he wouldn't feel the shame of being seen as just another homeless kid by passersby. Eating was never a normal activity. It was a hunt for survival. Manny would sometimes pick up leftover scraps, waiting until the market closed, hoping someone would discard something still edible. He experienced firsthand how hunger could make human dignity so fragile. In that world, Manny didn't just witness poverty, he saw how it broke people. He saw men who once carried pride, who once wanted to provide for their families, gradually crumble because they couldn't earn enough. He saw them drink to forget, fight to release frustration, or simply sit motionless with empty eyes, as if silently accepting that their lives had no way forward. Those scenes sank deep into Manny's mind, not as vague childhood recollections, but as harsh lessons about the future if he didn't carve out a different path. For Manny, poverty wasn't simply a lack of money. It meant being stripped of the right to respect, the right to choose, the right to say no to a life too small. It was in that harsh reality that Manny's deepest fear took shape, not fear of pain, not fear of fighting, but the fear of becoming invisible, the fear of being trapped in the same cycle as the adults he watched every day, the fear that one day he too would sit helplessly, watching his children go hungry just as he once had. That fear wasn't loud, but it was constant, clinging to him like a shadow, pushing him to seek any possible way out. When Manny first stepped into makeshift boxing gyms, where the mingled stench of sweat and blood filled the air, he didn't feel fear. Instead, it felt familiar, because at least the violence there followed rules. He had the chance to trade pain for money, exhaustion for opportunity. Boxing didn't come to him as a romantic dream. It came as a survival instinct, a way to avoid being crushed by life's circumstances. Manny's childhood left him no gentle memories to cherish, only bitter lessons that forced him to grow up too soon. He learned endurance. He learned silence. He learned not to expect anyone to rescue him. From those years sleeping in markets, scavenging for food, and watching adults collapse under poverty, a harsh truth took root in him. If you're not strong enough, you'll be left behind. If you don't rise, you'll be trampled. Manny understood very clearly that poverty doesn't just steal money, it takes dignity as well, and he vowed to himself that no matter the cost, he would never return to the feeling of being looked down on. That quiet but relentless obsession became the foundation of Manny Pacquiao's entire later life, for life, where every forward step carried the memory of a child who was once too afraid even to dream. When Manny Pacquiao first entered a boxing ring, he didn't step into a dream. He stepped into a survival bargain, where a child's fragile body had to endure grown men's punches just to earn a few coins for food. In Mindanao, boxing wasn't taught with theory or proper technique. It was a harsh reality, a place where the only rule was that the one who stayed standing survived, and the one who fell was forgotten. Manny fought when his bones hadn't even hardened, when his muscles were still developing, when every hit left lingering pain far longer than usual. But he had no choice. At an age when other children were still allowed to be afraid, Manny learned not to stop, because stopping meant returning to the streets, to hungry nights, to being treated as if he didn't exist. The makeshift gyms Manny attended offered no bright lights or cheering crowds, only the thick stench of sweat, tattered punching bags, and faces wearing the same expression, the expression of people trying to punch their way out of fate. Manny didn't fight because he loved fighting. He fought because boxing offered him what the streets never could: structure, rules, and, above all, a chance to be noticed. Every fight, no matter how small or obscure, became an opportunity to prove he hadn't been erased from the world. In those moments in the ring, no matter the pain, Manny felt clearly that at least there, his existence held value, not measured by pity, but by endurance and will. His body endured pressures it wasn't ready for, punches heavier than his own weight, grueling training sessions that left his hands trembling and his legs unsteady, all while he was still a growing child. PTSD. Yet, instead of breaking him instantly, those injuries slowly forged a shell, not numbness, but the ability to endure far beyond ordinary limits. Manny learned to see pain as a part of life, something to accept if he wanted to move forward. In that world, boxing became more than a sport. It became the only language through which he could tell the world he had not surrendered. Manny's early bouts rarely brought glory. They brought money to survive another day, another chance to keep fighting, and, most importantly, the sense that he was going somewhere. Even if the path was paved with blood and sweat, there was no time to build an identity or dream romantically of titles. Every time he stepped into the ring, his only thought was to stay standing until the final bell, to leave on his own feet. Because if he didn't, he'd be sent back to the anonymous life he feared more than any punch. It was during these years that a quiet truth formed within Manny. Boxing wasn't the destination, it was the escape. He didn't dream of becoming a champion. He dreamed of surviving long enough not to be swept away. Every punch he threw wasn't just directed at his opponent. It was aimed at the memories of nights sleeping in markets, at the dizzying hunger, at the contemptuous looks of others. Boxing gave Manny a temporary identity, a way to avoid dissolving into the nameless crowd of poor people simply trying to survive each day. But every escape comes at a price. The more he fought, the more he realized that boxing didn't just keep him alive, it began to consume him. His body adapted to pain. His mind grew accustomed to confrontation. And gradually, life outside the ring became unfamiliar. Manny no longer recognized himself without gloves on. He no longer knew his worth beyond his punches. That dependence, unnamed at the time, planted the seed for a life split in two. One version existing for the world, another hidden behind the bruises. In this phase, Manny was not yet an icon. He was not yet the hope of an entire nation. He became the only escape they could see, a narrow door opening through the walls of despair. And right there, the real burden began to take shape. Manny understood that from this moment forward, every fight he stepped into was no longer just about him. It carried the faith of millions of people, clinging to him to keep moving forward. At first, that feeling came with pride. Manny believed he was doing the right thing, that every victory wouldn't only save him, but would also give hope to others like him. But very quickly, that pride transformed into pressure. Each time he entered the ring, Manny wasn't facing only the opponent before him. He was facing the eyes of an entire nation, watching and waiting. He knew a loss wouldn't just be a career setback, it would strike at the fragile faith of poor people already accustomed to defeat. That thought quietly infiltrated his mind, turning every victory into an obligation rather than a choice. The media built Manny's image as an untiring hero. Stories of his impoverished childhood were riddled, not to evoke pity, but to shape a symbol of toughness, an image where weakness was forbidden. Manny gradually realized his story no longer belonged to him. It was edited, polished, simplified into a clear message. Look at Pacquiao. He was poorer than you, suffered more than you, yet he still triumphed. In that narrative, there was no space for exhaustion, no room for fear, and certainly no allowance for failure. The poor looked to Manny as a mirror. They both hoped and feared. They hoped that if Manny could succeed, so could they. They feared that if Manny fell, there would be no one left to believe in. Manny felt it on trips back home, in handshakes, in the eyes of those telling him they had placed their last bit of hope in him. No one spoke it outright, but Manny understood perfectly. He wasn't allowed to lose, not for himself, but for those who entrusted him with their faith. From that moment, winning stopped being a desire. It became a duty. Manny entered the ring carrying a new kind of pressure. Heavier than any punch, the responsibility of representing the voiceless. He fought not only with his body, but with the constant fear that if he fell, millions would confront the harsh truth once more. The world isn't fair. That fear pushed him to push his body past safe limits, to take on tougher fights and more dangerous opponents, because he believed he had no right to refuse. Gradually, Manny realized a painful truth. Winning didn't liberate him, it bound him tighter. Each victory raised expectations higher. and every new expectation narrowed the space where he could simply be himself. He was no longer allowed to be a young fighter still learning the ropes. He had to be the hero who never wavered. In silence, many began living as two parallel selves. One Manny Pacquiao for the public, strong, indomitable, always ready to win, and one Manny Pacquiao in private, exhausted, afraid, increasingly aware of a burden no one else could share. From that point on, every time he entered the ring, Manny wasn't just fighting to survive. He was fighting to keep a story from collapsing. He no longer had the right to lose, no longer the right to stop. Once he became the symbol of hope, he was forced to live according to the image the world had drawn for him. And in that very moment, when victory became duty, Manny Pacquiao's life entered a new chapter where sacrifice was no longer optional. It was a requirement to continue existing in the eyes of an entire nation. When Manny began conquering higher weight classes, the world celebrated greatness, something unprecedented in boxing history. But for him, it was a constant, daily, hourly exercise in self-erasure. Silent yet merciless, 8 weight divisions weren't merely 8 milestones of glory, they were 8 times his body was stretched to the edge of nearly unbearable strain. 8 times Manny forced himself beyond the natural limits of the human body.